In this Transform Your Summer Sweepstakes, we could win a screening of the new Transformers movie.
I love those movies. All the action, the fighting robots, the explosions.
Man, I wish Transformers existed in real life.
They do.
Oh, nice.
They should make a movie about this.
Oh, yeah.
Enter the Transform Your Summer Sweepstakes with new color-changing slushes and see Transformers The Last Night now in theaters. This is how you Sonic.
And thus, we have arrived to the final Michael Bay outing in the Transformers saga, Transformers The Last Night. And I believe he simultaneously went out with a bang and a whimper. I'm gonna preface this by saying I did not watch this film as part of the original binge, when I watched every other Transformers film back to back on June 15th. I know, I lied, lock me up, I'm guilty. But, I mean, I dropped the whole idea of making this video about the experience of watching all these Transformers films in one day about, I don't know, an hour and a half ago. I was simply so burnt out after watching Age of Extinction that I flat out rejected the idea of watching another Bayformers. I'm officially saying we're cheating. I'm not sitting through another one of these movies. I'm decided.
We're watching clips.
Ain't no way.
Holy shit, that's the entire movie in
This
3 minute
person
YouTube
put the
clips.
entire movie on YouTube clips.
We found it. We found the ancient relics.
So instead, me and my friend just skimmed through a movie clips playlist of the film to get the general sense of what the film was about, and moved on to Bumblebee. Much later on, I, of course, ended up watching the full film on my own, in a fresh state of mind, so that I could truly give this movie a chance. And a chance I gave it. I don't want to say The Last Night left me disappointed, because what the fuck was I expecting from the 5th Bayformers movie? But at the same time, I was kinda let down. This is without a doubt the worst reviewed, most detested film in the franchise, alongside Age of Extinction, to the point of even taking home a Razzie for Worst Picture in 2018, a franchise first. But Age of Extinction is just as negatively received, and I genuinely found that film to be worthwhile. And really, The Last Night, worst movie of 2017. Did y'all see that Tom Cruise Mummy movie?
Pan! This is November 4099er.
What the hell?
I'd even argue the first version of Justice League was a much worse film than this. But I do believe The Last Night is more than deserving of a lot of the reputation it gets. This is without a doubt the messiest, most plastic, underdeveloped, and convoluted installment in the series since Revenge of the Fallen. It exemplifies both the best and worst aspects about Bay's direction so far in either direction. Both his incredible eye for breathtaking visuals and action staging, and his absolute incompetence at delivering a satisfyingly paced and cohesive narrative.
You wretched human!
The Last Night was made when the Marvel Cinematic Universe was in its peak popularity, with Infinity War and Endgame right around the corner. So cinematic universes were in, not like they aren't anymore, of course, but this was when every fucking studio was trying to jump on board that cinematic universe bandwagon. DC was doing its own thing, you got the Conjuring universe, the failed Dark universe, and Hasbro and Paramount wanted a piece of that pie. So on top of everything, Transformers The Last Night was supposed to be the launching point for like an entire fucking 17 film long Transformers cinematic universe, which completely fell apart and inadvertently led Paramount to scrapping everything and starting fresh from a hard reboot of the series the following year. So The Last Night, more than anything, comes across as a deeply confused, unsatisfying Frankenstein's monster of about 100 different ideas, including it trying to be a nostalgia-baiting finale for the Bayformers saga, a continuation of Age of Extinction's story, a big, bombastic, trashy Michael Bay spectacle, and the starting point that 17 different films were supposed to build from. Honestly, we're lucky that this film ended up in the state that it did. It really could have been much worse. I'm just gonna go through the Cliff Notes version of the plot. There's this whole prologue set in Arthurian times, King Arthur and Merlin, and lists the help of these ancient Transformers that form into a giant mechanical King Ghidorah to help win a battle against the Saxons. I know we're still talking about Transformers here, but basically all this is showing is that the Transformers have been on Earth and influencing humanity's actions for a long time. We jump forward to the present, a little bit after the events of Age of Extinction. Optimus fucked off and crash-landed back on Cybertron, where he becomes basically indoctrinated by Quintessa, an ancient alien robot lady who created him. She puts him under a spell or something that turns him into the evil Nemesis Prime.
I've come.
Which sounds like an interesting direction for this movie to take, but it makes up about 2 minutes of this film's entire runtime. For some reason, more and more Transformers than ever have been coming to Earth, so the military is on full defense mode, tracking down and killing as many as possible. Autobots, Decepticons, it don't matter. We're reintroduced to Cade, who has this whole Big Boss Metal Gear Solid legend built around him, as the human who saves Transformers. It's corny, but I kinda like it.
Go,
Hey, you
go.
know there's a reward for turning you in.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool. You want to get punched in the face like really hard?
Some stuff happens, his daughter's in college, the military strikes a deal with Megatron, who looks fucking crazy in this, to track down Cade and his Autobot crew. It turns into Suicide Squad for a little bit, for some reason. I don't know why Michael Bay decided to use Suicide Squad as a source of inspiration for this film. In this scene, that could have been completely cut out and would have changed nothing.
Nitro Zeus. Baby, free at last. Thank Megatron, I'm free at last.
There's a big fight. I think this girl is a good character. Marky Mark is asked by this C-3PO guy on behalf of Anthony Hopkins. Anthony Hopkins takes Marky Mark and this woman to Exposition Town, explaining the entire history of Transformers on Earth and how they've been present throughout all human history, and every major historical figure throughout human history knew of their existence. Which, I mean, contradicts the whole aspect of the Transformers being on Earth for the first time in the first movie, but Michael Bay doesn't care, so we shouldn't care. Turns out Earth used to be Unicron, and Quintessa wants to destroy Unicron by crashing Cybertron into it. Evil Optimus is back on Earth, him and Bumblebee fight, and then Optimus isn't evil anymore. The most visually stunning final act out of all of these films takes place. Optimus and Bumblebee kill Quintessa, Megatron is seemingly defeated for good, the military prevents Cybertron from destroying Earth. Optimus gives another one of his famous end-of-movie monologues. There's a teaser for a sequel that'll never get made, and it's all over. Michael Bay's reign over this franchise draws to a close. Now there is a lot more about this movie that I completely glossed over, but these are basically the big plot points. Up until, I'd say, when Marky Mark gets picked up by the C-3PO wannabe and taken to Anthony Hopkins' exposition lair, I'm genuinely with this film. I think it's really engaging, and I love the story it sets up. It presents this world without order. Humans and Transformers are both constantly at odds. Transformers are already fighting amongst themselves constantly. And for whatever reason, more and more just keep landing on Earth. And the main man who usually keeps everyone in check, Optimus Prime, has vanished without a trace. Adding on to this, I really love the ticking clock element to the plot that Cybertron colliding into Earth provides. It serves as a constant reminder that the film is building towards something, which helps the pacing a little. That is, until the movie forgets about this whole world-ending destroying ticking clock and just dicks around for ages. Sandwiched in between fun and exciting opening scenes and build-up, and the most gorgeous and visually stunning finale out of any of the Transformers movies, is this huge, horrendous, obscenely boring middle chunk that just flops back and forth between exposition and bad comedy, exposition and bad comedy, as well as a pointless, mildly headache-inducing chase scene thrown in for good measure. If it sounds like I'm repeating a lot of talking points from my Revenge of the Fallen segment, I mean, I kinda am. These two movies have a lot of overlap, and not in a good way. They're both extremely convoluted, extremely messy, poorly plotted, and painfully overlong. It wastes so much time just meandering around between the action. This would be such an endlessly better film if Bay just trimmed like 20 minutes out of this middle section of the film. Since this originally was going to be the beginning of a 17-film long cinematic universe, there's so much unnecessary and boring exposition, pointless flashback scenes, and lines of dialogue alluding to what would have at some point been spin-off movies. But there's just no point to it all anymore since we know none of these are going to get made now. Since this movie flopped, or at least flopped in comparison to how much Age of Extinction and Dark of the Moon made, and Hasbro completely scrapped all their plans for this universe. Age of Extinction phased out a lot of bad, obnoxious comedy from the first 3 films, but it rears its ugly head again here big time.
Sure you are.
No whoopee, Mr. Cade?
It's been a while.
Well, how long's a while? A week, a month, a year?
None of your business.
Well, we need to ask you the question.
A while.
Huh.
Huh? What is this? Is that like another English thing?
No, just a curious thing.
Well, maybe I'm saving myself.
What are you saving yourself for, old age?
You, English lady, shut it.
It's all very at odds with the seemingly more mature and serious tone it goes for at the beginning. Anthony Hopkins is fucking crazy in this. He flip-flops between 3 different modes: wise old mature narrator mode, brain-rotting dementia mode, and completely wild unhinged mode.
Move, bitch, get out of my way! Move, bitch, get out!
He knows exactly what type of film he's in, and he's leaning into it hard, which I can respect.
All you boys and girls! Off the sub now! Off the sub now! Move! Go on, push! Move your fat ass! Push, squeeze! Go!
There's a lot of nostalgia bait and callbacks to the first 3 Bayformers films in this, which I thought was interesting. Generic military white man is here again, and I don't know, he doesn't really do much. John Turturro's also back, but fortunately he's barely in it, and it feels like all his scenes were shot entirely like in one afternoon. They reference Sam's existence here, which they avoided in Extinction, and turns out he's been dead for a while, which gave me a big laugh. I think it was just Michael Bay forgetting or not caring, but there's this little mistake where there's this nice moment with Megatron who finds Starscream's head.
The end is near, my old treacherous friend.
Oh, she's coming!
What a shame you'll be unable to see it.
But Starscream's head got completely blown to bits in Dark of the Moon, and it shouldn't be intact the way it is here. I don't know. Michael Bay clearly doesn't care, so neither should I. One of my big problems with this film is that in sharp contrast to all the development and the whole arc his character went through in Age of Extinction, nothing interesting is done with Optimus Prime here. The whole Nemesis Prime angle could have been interesting if he was more of a direct antagonist to Cade throughout the film, instead of there just being one fight that lasts a minute and then it's over. And then after he's cured or whatever, Optimus is just being Optimus. He does some cool shit in some action scenes, he gives heroic speeches, and that's it. No more depth, no more real character. It's honestly a letdown because I honestly think both Age of Extinction and Dark of the Moon together did wonders to turn him into a really interesting character. And I wanted this film to continue that, but oh well. There also aren't really any politics here either to talk about, which is what I think made Age of Extinction so interesting for me. Maybe there's something here about military officials allying themselves with Megatron, the real, actual evil Transformer, just to find Cade and the Autobots because they're so committed to bringing him to justice that they just don't care he's the whole reason the Chicago War happened, which was the direct reason for human-Transformer relations being so bad now. I do like the barricade redesign. Michael Bay was getting a little more explicit with the whole punish and enslave police metaphor here. But there isn't much outside that, which is in contrast to how directly political Age of Extinction was, and even Dark of the Moon was to an extent. The film is at its best when it completely embraces the whole new sci-fi fantasy approach Michael Bay took. I love how it ties Transformers in with the idea of them being real-world magical figures. I love the ancient Cybertronian guys that transform into a giant mecha three-headed dragon, basically King Ghidorah. I do kinda dig the whole Arthurian legend, King Arthur, Lancelot strings that tie throughout this film. The Knights of the Round Table, Excalibur, the idea of forging legacies and creating legends. There's a lot of really interesting, fantastical elements at play here that I really like. I think it's a really cool idea to play into the fantasy aspect while combining it with the mechanical sci-fi Transformers aspect. It's really unique in that sense. At points, this movie really does work as a full-on spectacle. Some of these massive visual effects heavy sequences are so remarkably well done and something that only Michael Bay could pull off. The final act of this film is legitimately an impressive feat of blockbuster filmmaking in a way that harkens back to the glorious maximalism of Dark of the Moon's finale. The spectacle that comes from these giant floating planetary structures and the helicopter transport ships bobbing and weaving through them, the world-ending stakes, Michael Bay getting to recreate Saving Private Ryan's Omaha Beach with giant robots. It's really remarkable and gorgeous and epic and intense and genuinely visually stunning. It's everything that you'd want from a big theater blockbuster, and everything I feel has been robbed from blockbusters in recent years by the idea of replacing big-scale spectacle with just IP crossovers. It's so good, it does make me forget about a lot of the really bad problems the rest of the movie has, and I just wish this was all in service of a better, more cohesive fucking story. When your movie is 2.5 hours long, and at least 30 minutes of that runtime is bad comedy, time-wasting meandering, intrusive setups for sequels and spin-offs, it's just hard to give a shit about what's happening, which is really unfortunate. And then when it also ends on such an unsatisfying, open-ended note as well, keeping things open for a sequel that's never gonna happen, it's just disappointing. Also, goddamn, pick a fucking aspect ratio, Michael Bay. This movie is the worst example of that annoying switching aspect ratio shot on IMAX problem I've ever seen. Bay basically shot every scene in this film on like 3 or 4 different cameras, all producing a different sized image, and instead of just focusing on maybe the big spectacle scenes being IMAX and regular dialogue scenes being regular film, like normal, he just throws everything he shot into one scene, which is why the more tentative viewers may have noticed the bars on the top and bottom constantly changing shape.
We have guests!
What's the matter with you? Oh, shit, my bits are falling off.
Idiot!
What the hell?
Very frisky today. Good God.
Master, he's a complete knucklehead.
I'm awfully sorry about that, but, you see, he thinks it's still the year 1918 or 1914, something like that, isn't it? I mean, it's late onset of, well, robot dementia.
You do get used to it after maybe like 30 minutes, and when it actually commits to being a full-scale IMAX film, it really makes use of that extra size. Like I said, it's a gorgeous film at points. I really think there's a pretty good 2-hour film in all this, if they just stuck to the plot and cut out all the bullshit meandering, bad comedy, most of that entire sequence that just exists to set up potential spin-offs, and focused more on what works, which is always the action and spectacle. It could have been something special, but now it serves as the strange amalgamation of too many different ideas going into one film, and as a whole, it is a somewhat satisfying, yet also extremely confused note for Michael Bay and the Bayformers to go out on. I'm giving Transformers: The Last Knight 2.5 out of 5 stars. It's closer to 3 stars than it is 2, but it's pretty much just because I really like the final act. I don't know if it's Stockholm Syndrome for having spent so long with these movies, but as the editing process for this video has stretched on and on and on, as much as I hate a lot about them, I've kind of come to really almost respect the Bayformers in a weird sort of way. These clunky, massive, confused, special films, as they were coming out, it was widely agreed that these were the worst films the big Hollywood system were putting out. These were the loudest, dumbest, most corporate, artistically bankrupt movies in theaters. They were big, loud, annoying commercials for action figures made for children and teenage boys. I haven't even touched on the bewildering amount of product placements spewed throughout these films. But looking back on them now in 2023, knowing just how artistically bankrupt and dumb Hollywood can really get, even the worst of the Bayformers still provide unique things to take from them. Putting aside the many, many flaws these films have, they really are culturally significant in the sense of how they relate to the dumbing down of Hollywood blockbusters and how they adapted and changed themselves alongside the fluctuating American political and cultural landscape between the mid-2000s and the 2010s. Transformers 2007 and Revenge of the Fallen feel like perfect time capsules into a simpler time. That feeling of being a child and waking up during summer break and heading over to your friend's house to play Modern Warfare 2 split screen on his Xbox 360.
Okay. Oh! Oh my god! Oh! Oh my fucking god! Oh! 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 No! Get the camera!
Out there eating turkey sandwiches with Doritos in them and sipping on Capri Suns and all that shit. Dark of the Moon is when you're grown a little more and your outlook on life has become a little more nihilistic. You're in middle school or high school now, and during the Obama administration you become more interested in politics. You're realizing, hey, this Iraq invasion has gone on for a bit too long, and America sure isn't looking like the golden child anymore to the rest of the world. In fact, we're kind of viewed as the obese, abusive, alcoholic uncle who peaked in high school, who's getting drunk during Thanksgiving dinner and tries to body slam the dinner table after a political argument with your leftist cousin. Age of Extinction is when you've fully grown to realize the American government doesn't give a single fuck about its citizens and will happily stretch the invasion on and squeeze every single penny out of the shrinking middle class for the sake of allowing the corporations to really rule the country. Also, your childhood friend, a Hispanic kid you've grown up alongside all your life, just had his parents deported by ICE since they were undocumented. And the last night, I don't even fucking know. You had a whole drug phase and got really hooked on dropping acid while watching Adult Swim at 3 a.m. At first, I hated these films, despised them, each and every one of them, and now I can't deny that they are very unique and interesting films all in their own right, that are worth continuing to discuss more and more as time goes on. Michael Bay is a legitimate American auteur. His creative voice should not be underestimated and overlooked. And these are entirely his films. Each of these are his creative vision. The excess, the changing politics, the sexuality, the crassness, the dirty grunginess and moral ambiguity, the violence. These are all pieces of a whole that make up the crazed mind of Michael Bay and projected on screen as a $200 million blockbuster. And honestly, I'll take that raw creative vision over any corporate-made, boring, generic, superhero comic book movie out there. Movies that are made by the producers and written by boardrooms 10 years prior to their release. Bay essentially used each of these films as his muses to experiment with and test the limits of what he was capable of as a blockbuster filmmaker. He really went above and beyond for what were originally just supposed to be big-budget toy commercials. It makes sense why he stuck with his franchise for so long, even after showing multiple times that he'd rather move on to smaller projects. The resources that were at his disposal were immense. They allowed him to shoot in some of the most incredible locations in the world that normally he wouldn't have access to. Like Egypt, right next to the fucking pyramids. He closed down huge chunks of Chicago that were never closed down before. Kennedy Space Center, right next to a real NASA space shuttle, Washington, D.C., Hong Kong, Alnwick Castle in the United Kingdom. He was also allowed to experiment with cutting-edge filmmaking technology that he normally wouldn't even have access to. Like, they even specifically designed smaller, lightweight 3D IMAX cameras to fit his style of shooting for Dark of the Moon. He pushed what computer-generated effects were capable of again and again, fine-tuning and getting them as perfect as possible. There's a real reason why a movie like Transformers 3 still looks vastly better than most, even higher-budget superhero films nowadays. He was given complete, unchecked creative freedom and insane budgets to do whatever he wanted, and he indulged himself. There's a reason why these films have such egregious, overlong runtimes. If he was allowed to go big, he was gonna go big for these movies. I do get the hate these films get. Believe me, I do. But the good and even great aspects about these films should not be ignored. Of course, there's the VFX that are great. Much of the action is fantastic. It's also really worth mentioning how well Bay stages the contrast between humans and Transformers, especially during the action sequences. You seriously feel the size and weight of the Transformers, and that is an aspect that is sorely missing from the newer films. But at the same time, from a narrative and a character and pacing standpoint, and everything else that goes into the aspects of filmmaking that aren't just the technicals, when it comes to those aspects, they completely fall apart. As much as these films allowed Bay to go on and fund his own smaller projects, they really did a lot to ruin his image among film fans, which is a damn shame. Michael Bay was an icon in the 90s and early 2000s. I think Pain and Gain is legitimately incredible, and I really loved his newest film, Ambulance. But once he was viewed as a cutting-edge voice in blockbuster filmmaking, now he's just a guy who made 5 really shitty movies that dominated Hollywood for a long time.
Michael Bay presents Explosions! Explosions from Michael Bay! Boom! Michael Bay explosion!
And I do directly think some of his newer films, particularly Ambulance flopping, are directly the fault of these films tarnishing his name. Although it still is nice that he's finally out of Transformers jail, and we can look forward to newer, smaller, more interesting films from him. And one last thing to mention for this whole Bayformers Conclusion thing, the score for each of these movies by Steve Jablonsky is perfect. Amazing even. His music adds so much to these films. Jablonsky's music can shift from pulse-pounding, goosebumps-inducing, massive orchestral awesomeness
Execute legend. Contact strike.
to somber and melancholic and thoughtful. To sharp and intimidating. His music is honestly my favorite part of these movies. And looking at other stuff he scored, it's stuff like DC League of Super Pets, Bloodshot, The Sims 3, Your Highness. I feel like he could really be doing more.
Look what I got.
Now, in every McDonald's Happy Meal, you can find fun with the power of milk and a cool toy inspired by Bumblebee, the new movie in theaters soon.
Where did I park the car?
The Last Night completed its theatrical run with a worldwide box office gross of $605 million. which was an enormous drop-off compared to the $1 billion Dark of the Moon and Age of Extinction raked in. Made on a production budget of $260 million as well, not including advertising, it was the first time one of these films actually flopped. And the low box office returns alongside the extremely negative reviews, it was the first time Hasbro and Paramount decided to reevaluate this franchise as a whole. So Hasbro made the drastic decision to completely scrap their plans for a 14-long cinematic universe tied to the Bay films they had originally planned. But they took one of the ideas that they had written for a potential prequel, a solo Bumblebee movie set during World War II, and after many rewrites, a complete change in visual aesthetics, time period, tone, and cast, and Lakia Animation Studios producer and director Travis Knight in the director's chair, Bumblebee was born. Now actually, I had seen this movie in theaters when it came out, but when I was writing the introduction, I completely forgot about it, which kind of speaks about the movie. Bumblebee is fine. Very, very fine. It's extremely lighthearted, it's safe, it's simple, it's the complete antithesis of what Bay did with the franchise. But admittedly, it is kind of what it needed in order to breathe new life into the franchise. By the time Last Night came around, people were definitely tired of Michael's shtick.
No! We need ideas how to stop the terrorists! An 18-wheeler spins out of control, and it's all like, Brosh! In this huge tanker full of diamonds. Craw! Craw! Those aren't ideas, those are special effects. I don't understand the difference.
And the immensely negative reputation these films garnered over the years finally showed with the lowest box office gross in the franchise. And so a move was made on Hasbro's part, I think, to overcompensate for a more kinda kiddie, family-friendly iteration of one of these movies, as well as lean hard into the 80s nostalgia trend that was going on at the time with Stranger Things popularity. Bumblebee follows Bumblebee after he flees Cybertron during the war and crash lands on Earth. In a scuffle with a Decepticon, he loses his voice, pisses off a group of soldiers led by John Cena, and then shuts off. He's later restarted by Carly, who's pretty much every teenage girl lead in a coming-of-age story movie, and they go on a whole personal, whimsical journey of discovery together and stuff, and he fights two Decepticons that pursue him throughout the film, and the human villain played by John Cena learns to love him, and at the end he regroups with Optimus. Bumblebee is super low-key, super low stakes, and such a huge change visually and pacing-wise from what's come before it. Travis Knight's direction is much more, I'd say, minimalist compared to Bay's. It's all very flatly shot and visually kinda plain. The change in aspect ratio is also noticeable. The Bay films were shot very widescreen. They were shot in scope, which gave them an extremely cinematic look, while Bumblebee was shot in a flat aspect ratio. It's much less cinematic and in turn kinda makes the movie have like a whole kinda cheap TV movie aesthetic to it, which pairs with a more lighthearted tone. It just kinda feels more like a movie made for kids. It's such a huge change tonally and visually from what's come before. It's legitimately whiplash-inducing.
Come on, man, those things sting.
What things? These things?
Ow!
You know, I wouldn't know. I haven't been hit yet.
Oh, okay, you know what? That's too close, man. You could have taken out an eye. I got a date tonight, man. This ain't sexy.
You're right. I'm sorry.
Ow!
That one was on me. That's a malfunctioning trigger. This weapon is just faulty. Someone is going to get a talking
Man,
to
just
when
stop. All right, just stop.
Bumblebee is such a safe, cute little film, and be prepared for me to use the words safe and cute a lot throughout this segment. It's not nasty, it's not overly violent, it's not politically charged or has any weird, deep-fried sexual energy to it. It's not big and bombastic and loud, which is disappointing in a way, but I do find myself falling for this film's kiddie vibe pretty hard. The dialogue is simple and the stakes are lower, and the story is easy to digest. And at just under 2 hours, it's the perfect length as well. It is an extremely derivative film. There's not much that's unique about it. Take the coming-of-age aspect of Lady Bird or Edge of 17, Mix it with the discovery of a new being or creature or robot from E.T. and the Iron Giant, and add the military wanting to capture it to experiment on it aspect of those movies as well. Then throw the 80s Transformers coat of paint over it and you've got Bumblebee. Speaking of which, I fucking love how the Transformers look in this film. It's playing hard into easy nostalgia points, and I'm not even really nostalgic for this franchise, but seeing the Gen 1 blocky, vibrantly colorful, toy-like designs completely brought to life with some great CGI work is awesome. The whole Cybertron sequence at the beginning and in one flashback are by far the best parts of the film. I just really wish Hasbro would make a feature-length CG animated Cybertron war movie with this art style. The 80s setting was definitely picked to capitalize off the crazy 80s nostalgia circle jerk at the time brought on by Stranger Things, but it is also admittedly a nice change of pace and tone, and it gives the film a pretty unique identity that stands out from the rest of the live-action films. And there are a lot of nice callbacks to the 80s film in this. Me and my friend very much did what, as the kids would say, soy Wojak at the screen when the dog popped out of Shockwave's chest.
Hey, nobody calls Soundwave uncharismatic. Yeah, let's kick tailgate.
Again, I adore how they brought back the Gen 1 designs. You got the fun costume design, the soundtrack which is a little overkill at points, and the vibrant color palette. It never gets too intrusive or go completely overboard with the 80s circle jerk, which I'd say the more recent seasons of Stranger Things do. But the glue that ties this whole film together is 100% our lead, Carly, played by Hallie Stanfield. I did kind of jab a little at the film, saying she's every coming-of-age female lead ever, but even so, she breathes so much life into this film. I love the story going on with her grieving after her father's passing and using Bumblebee to come to terms with it, and the aspect of her being a car junkie and mechanic ties into her relationship with Bumblebee perfectly. She's basically exactly what Michaela's character should have been in the first two films. And I do think John Cena is really fun in this film. He fits that 80s macho man soldier archetype perfectly, which is definitely what they're going for. And the two Decepticon villains are pretty cool too. I like the conflicting personalities aspect that they got, and they look amazing. The story as a whole is very satisfying and well told, and the emotional beats hit as well. For as kind of bland as the filmmaking is, I still felt pretty much everything the movie wanted me to feel. And because of that, even though I normally hate this brand of ultra-safe, super simple filmmaking, I just can't hate this movie. It doesn't all work for me. Some of the comedy is just really lame.
No, don't run! Do not run! She ran.
It's not annoying or obnoxious like it is in the Bay films. It's just kinda on the same level as these little quips you'd hear in a Marvel film. And I think they go a little overboard with the cutesy nature of how Bumblebee is depicted. I know getting shut down definitely messed him up a bit and sent him back developmentally, I guess. But for most of the film, he's basically portrayed like a toddler. Like, he's still supposed to be a soldier. Basically, I think some of his actions are a little out of character, but this is a kid's movie. I'm digging way too deep into it. All in all, Bumblebee is solid. It's fun, lighthearted, simple, little, fun, cutesy, little, fun movie. And it's also the reboot this franchise admittedly needed. As much as I appreciate Michael Bay's ambition, he pushed things a little too far with The Last Night, and things needed to be reeled back in. But at the same time, it's such a shame that with this film marking a big, safer shift for the franchise, we'll never quite get that same brand of messy, disjointed, gonzo blockbuster Michael Bay brought to the franchise. Like I said in my Bayformers Conclusion, part of me misses the nastiness, the depravity, and the excess of those films. They're extremely disjointed and at points complete and total brain rot, but I can appreciate the ambition, and that's something Bumblebee, which is just a pretty good cutesy E.T. riff, completely lacks. Bumblebee is very much like a big scoop of vanilla ice cream. It's nothing special, but it's good enough and will satisfy you. But sometimes, you know, I want something a little crazier. Give me Rocky Road or Chunky Monkey. Except for those flavors, maybe a third of the chocolate chips are actually going to be little pieces of dog shit instead of chocolate. And while as a whole it'll be more filling and delicious, you risk eating little pieces of dog shit. And that's how I would compare Bumblebee to the Bayformers. But for the next film, we'll see an example of the inverse, where the same brand of uninspired filmmaking really doesn't end up working for me. I'm giving Bumblebee 3 stars. For all the problems I have with its uninspired nature, I still think it's very sweet and it has a lot of heart. And the Cybertron scenes are so nice.
You've never faced anything like this. Let them come.
And if you don't know, now you know.
And we're all safe for the moment here in Houston. Be sure to check out Transformers Rise of the Beasts in theaters June 9th.
After having binged through 6 Transformers films all back to back, beginning at around 6 in the morning, we were finally caught up. Words cannot even begin to describe the feeling of exhaustion we were facing. Both our brains and bodies were completely worn out. People bring up the Tour de France, Iron Man races, the Alcatraz swim as some of the greatest endurance tests one could ever partake in. And I laugh, for none of these even hold a fraction of a candle to the intense burden that 6 of these fucking movies have on the human brain. But we persisted, and around 10 p.m. we headed to our closest movie theater for the, at the time, newly released Transformers Rise of the Beasts. We just finished Bumblebee about an hour ago, and now it is time to conclude the conclude our day with the final and most recent film in the saga, Transformers Rise of the Beasts.
I cannot wait to see a huge ass monkey on screen, dude.
It's in a theater this time, so
this one should be fancy.
It'll be very refreshing than being on that couch. Rise of the Beasts was directed by Stephen Caple Jr., the guy who did Creed 2, and marks the largest gap between live-action Transformers films, coming out 5 years after Bumblebee. And while it has no connection to Bumblebee's story, it's a continuation from that rebooted universe that film set up. Hasbro had a lot riding on this film. I know Transformers fans have been asking for a live-action Beast Wars adaptation for ages, and it seemed like this was finally it. Hasbro is also hoping that this would lay the groundwork for the next few Transformers films to build off of, as of which 2 sequels and a spin-off have already been greenlit, which to me is fucking crazy. And my main takeaway from Rise of the Beasts was, oh man, I kinda wish when Michael was doing these. Rise of the Beasts is an extremely generic, extremely boring, weightless, substanceless, and forgettable romp. This might not be the worst of these films, but it really is the most forgettable in my mind. First, there's this opening sequence where we're introduced to Optimus Primal and the Maximals, who for the most part we won't see altogether for the next hour or so. It shows off this new rendition of Unicron that eats their planet. I'll talk more about this movie's Unicron and how lame he is in a bit. We jump ahead to the present. This film is set in the 90s for no real reason. There's nothing about the story that requires it to have been set in the 90s. We follow Noah Diaz, played by Anthony Ramos. He's part of a single mother household and his brother's got a bone disease that needs treatment. He's trying to get a job, but he's turned down for external factors.
Listen, I can't have someone like you mess up what I built.
Someone like me?
So in order to get money, he turns to stealing a car for a friend. At the same time, our secondary lead, Elena, who works with historical artifacts, is constantly not taken seriously because of her race. This is the aspect of the movie that I actually really like, which I'll get more into later. And also, this is the aspect that had a lot of chuds on the internet crying over how this film, quote-unquote, went woke.
The only real difference between this movie and the other two is that the 2 main characters in this one are nowhere near as likable as Shia LaBeouf and Megan Fox. Fuck, even Megan's replacement, Rosie Huntington-Whiteley, was much better than this girl. At least she was pleasant to look at. But when they casted this actress, I'm guessing sex appeal was the last thing they were searching for.
Turns out the car Noah stole is a Transformer named Mirage, and he gets dragged along to meet the Transformers, and turns out a relic Elena has is a key that these guys called the Terracons are trying to get. That unlocks a giant laser that'll bring Unicron into the Milky Way so he can eat Earth. So the Transformers and Terracons fight, Bumblebee dies, the Transformers go to Peru and stuff, and the Maximals get involved finally in this movie that they're barely in, despite it entirely being advertised around them. There's this big ugly CG fight that looks like a video game. Noah gets a really dumb looking Iron Man suit that looks really shit. Bumblebee's alive again. It's just so fucking boring. The good guys win, the bad guys lose. What more do I need to say? I guess I should mention that there's this after credit scene, after credit scene that sets up a potential G.I. Joe crossover. So whoop-de-doo, we got another cinematic universe on the horizon. On all fronts, Rise of the Beasts is such a subpar experience of a Transformers film. It lacks the same level of visual excitement that Bay brought to his films, and lacks the same level of heart that Bumblebee had. I like what they set up with the characters, mainly the character of Noah, having to deal with poverty, racism, and his brother's illness, but everything interesting about him is dropped as soon as the Transformers mission begins, and he basically just becomes a crutch for the story to lie on whenever the Transformers aren't able to do something. And when there is actually interesting stuff involving the Transformers, it focuses too much on the humans. It's constantly at odds with itself. I don't think Stephen Caple Jr. is a bad director, but I think he's really unfit for helming the type of movie that this is. For a huge budget blockbuster like this, you really need someone to embrace the excess and spectacle you can achieve within the guise of it being a blockbuster, which is something Bay mastered, if not going a little too far with it at some points. The action in this film is extremely bland and uninspired. The Transformers lack any sense of weight and scale, and the longer it goes on, the more substanceless it becomes, relying so hard on CGI, especially in that last act where it just becomes a giant mess of gray-brown CG goo where the Transformers fight off an endless wave of the same two bad guys. It's so visually uninteresting. Compare this to any Bayformers action sequence, the highway chase from the first, the forest battle from Revenge, anything from the last hour of Dark of the Moon, that final fight with Lockdown and Extinction, even when it went into full CG territories like it did for most of the Last Night's finale. You can really feel the difference between how Bay handles action and how Caple does. And Caple's inexperience with working with visual effects of this level leads the rest of the film to look much flatter. The CG also looks hardly better, and in a lot of ways kinda worse than what Bay was able to achieve nearly 10 years ago. Like, I genuinely think Dark of the Moon and Age of Extinction were much better looking films from a visual effects standpoint. And a big part of that was how hard Bay pushed the limits of the technology available to him, which I don't think is something Caple did at all. In the early parts of the film where there are no Transformers, the direction shines much more. When it's just focusing on Noah, it looks much better. The camera work is more interesting. I really like this car heist scene. It felt really reminiscent of Baby Driver with how he works music into it. And at the beginning, at least, this movie seems like it has a lot to say about institutionalized racism, people in poverty being forced to commit crimes in order to pay the bills and support their family. It's also an interesting detail that Noah's brother is sick with sickle cell disease, a disease predominantly more common in poor, usually African American communities. But the political angle is pretty much only in the first act and then disappears as soon as the Transformers get involved, which is pretty disappointing. The whole movie just comes across as so underwhelming. There's no feeling of globetrotting or adventure when the characters get to Peru. Visually, it feels the exact same as when they're in New York. I don't know how, but in a film where the antagonist is a planet-sized monster who is on the verge of literally eating Earth, I felt no stakes whatsoever. Unicron is so dull. He has no character like he did in the original film. You never got any sense of scale with him. The opening scene from the original film works wonders in making him feel like a legitimately terrifying force, with how he completely devours this entire world, with all these poor little guys who get caught in it. It lingers on the destruction and chaos. In Rise of the Beasts, we get like one wide shot on the Maximal planet in the distance being destroyed, and that's it. So in the climax, when we're on the verge of Unicron winning, we don't feel the same level of fear. This one Terracon guy is the real antagonist of the film, and he's extremely bland. I don't know why they insisted on getting such an incredible character actor as Peter Dinklage to voice him, if they're not going to give him anything to work with, and just have him play the most generic, big bad guy in the franchise. I don't even remember this guy's fucking name. Compare him to how much personality and screen presence Lockdown had in Extinction. Once again, it's night and day. The Maximals are widely underutilized. This bird, Air Razor, by such a large margin has the most amount of screen time, and she's alone for most of the film. By the time you even get to all of them being on screen together, it's approaching the final act of the film. None of them have any distinguishable personalities or character. Like, if I were a big Beast Wars fan and I had been waiting for my favorite character, I don't know, Cheetor, to finally have his live-action debut, and in here I got like 5 minutes of screen time and one line from him out of this movie, I'd be bummed as hell. It's like they only exist in the story to make the final battle, I guess, bigger, maybe? I do really like what they do with Optimus here. It's the first time he actually felt like a character since Age of Extinction. He's very spite-fueled and filled with so much regret and anger for having gotten the Autobots trapped on Earth after Cybertron fell. And his arc with him choosing to forget about going back to Cybertron and accepting his new life on Earth is great stuff. But at the same time, all the scenes that should have focused just on Optimus keep interjecting these fucking human characters into them. Like, let the movie be about the Transformers. I don't know how, but in the films where the human characters are vastly more annoying, they still don't feel as intrusive as they do here. I also hate how his face looks in this. He looks great for the most part, but there's something about his face that just looks so dorky and off-putting. More than anything out of all these films, Rise of the Beasts feels the most like a product. Hasbro wanted a Transformers movie to make money and sell toys and launch a new cinematic universe, and they got that. That ending is such a reminder of what this film really is. You gotta future-proof your franchise and make it known that there will be more products to come. It's so artless. The Last Night was also a film somewhat built around setting up a whole universe of films, but there is so much more working in that film's favor. There's so much more that's unique and memorable about it. The sole purpose of a blockbuster is to deliver a story and spectacle that's unachievable anywhere else, that wows the audience, that takes them into a new world, or blows them away with gorgeous visuals and memorable set pieces. Rise of the Beasts accomplishes nothing of note. Nothing to write home about, no big set pieces or moments that will stick with you. It's completely disposable. And say what you will about Bay, but his films were not that. It's not enough to just see big robots turning into cars anymore. We've seen so much of that already. You have to do something fresh and new and interesting, and bringing Unicron and the Maximals into this story could have been that. But as I already said, it just comes across as a missed opportunity more than anything. It's dull, it's lifeless, it's boring, it's uninspired. Its big saving grace, though, is its runtime. At hardly over 2 hours, it doesn't feel nearly as bloated as some of Bay's outings, which is a plus. I'm giving Rise of the Beasts 2 stars. I don't feel like I can rate it any lower because overall, it isn't that bad for as much as I just shit on it. It's just painfully underwhelming and uninspired. But I also feel weird about having The Last Night rated only a half star more, given how much more ambitious and memorable it was. I don't know. It's been 2 fucking hours. I don't want to keep talking about these movies anymore.
Dude, the Transformers sucked.
Oh no, they didn't. They were more than meets the eye.
As we draw to a close, I genuinely can't believe that I'm almost done. This video has morphed and shapeshifted and evolved and, well, transformed into a whole different beast from what it started as. I began this journey June 15th when I watched all these films in one day, and now as of recording this concluding paragraph of my script, it's October. What I originally had planned as a fun little half review, half vlog, where I spend maybe 10-15 minutes reviewing each film, has turned into a gargantuan deconstruction retrospective on this series, both the Bay films and the non-Bays. And it has taken me so much longer than I ever could have predicted it would have taken me. I just kept finding new things to bring up about these movies. This really is a franchise like no other. I guess I'll rank them all here, starting from the best and working my way down to the worst. The best, without question, is easily Transformers the movie. It looks gorgeous, it's super fun, it's super short. I love the characters, I love Unicron. It's just a total blast. And really the only one of these films I can see myself rewatching multiple times. The second best for me is Age of Extinction, which I know is crazy. It's easily the best Michael Bay Transformers movie for me. I love how politically charged it is, I love Lockdown, I love what they do with Optimus's character, and I love the Dinobots. It is crazy overlong, but to me it's a much more focused and cohesive film than, say, Revenge of the Fallen or Dark of the Moon. I just think it's a pretty solid flick. Then I'd probably put Bumblebee as 3 for me. Its overly simplistic nature is definitely a fault, but it's just got too much heart for it for me to hate. It's real cute, it's real fun, and I love seeing those Gen 1 designs again. And fourth down the list, I'm actually going to put The Last Night. For all the problems I have with it, and even though I rated Dark of the Moon higher, it's just such a fucking crazy ass movie. It's so big and so ambitious, which is hugely commendable on Bay's part. For as poorly plotted and scripted as it is, when it works, for me, it really works. And Anthony Hopkins is a blast to watch in it. And next is Dark of the Moon. It's a massive step above the first and second Bayformers, but it's still an extremely messy, disjointed disaster piece that really is only worth it for that final act. I just really find Sam to be an extraordinarily annoying character, and he really sinks every film he's in for me. But like I said, that final act is blockbuster nirvana. It's everything and more you'd want these films to be. Next, I'm dropping Transformers 2007, the one that started it all. Even though I'm really not a big fan of this film and find it to be really boring, credit must be given to it just for being the first. Beforehand, bringing Transformers into live action seemed totally inconceivable, but Michael Bay, Steven Spielberg, and the artists at ILM really made it happen, and that's very commendable. But aside from that, it's just kinda dull. And the second worst film for me is Rise of the Beasts. I put this one over Revenge of the Fallen entirely because it's shorter, but without a doubt, it's the lamest, most forgettable film in the series. There was so much going for it that could have resulted in a great Transformers film, but every aspect of it is just so underwhelming. And the worst film to me is easily Revenge of the Fallen. Ignore what I said when I said I might prefer it to the first one. I wrote that like 4 months ago, and have since changed my mind.
It's truly a disastrous film in every way, and definitely warrants the reputation it's gotten. But I think the fact that I had way more to say about this one compared to the first film, it kind of automatically puts it ahead of it for me.
The visual effects are incredible, the original score is pretty great, but everything else is just legitimately brain rot. Like, I actively feel my brain rotting when I look at anything related to this film. It's fucking garbage. The Transformers franchise is really something special. The way these films changed over the years is remarkable. What was originally meant to be a feature-length toy commercial was hijacked by a madman who used this franchise as his muse for crazy blockbuster antics at a budget level like no other, and cutting-edge filmmaking technologies at his disposal. He reinvented the series for the dingy, dirty, angsty 2000s with one film, and the other film serving as the perfect cautionary tale of what happens when you try to make a movie without writers. So pay your fucking writers, Hollywood. Then the franchise changed again for the more politically charged 2010s. Then, when Marvel started to drastically surpass Transformers in terms of box office numbers, the franchise was altered again to try and adapt and capitalize off this new cinematic universe blockbuster trend. Then, when the 80s craze hit Hollywood, the franchise changed again to capitalize off that trend. Then it reinvented itself once more to serve as nothing more than an uninspired commercial made to sell sequels rather than toys. There's a lot of remarkably awful aspects to each of these films. When the Bay ones were coming out especially, they were the biggest, dumbest movies out there. But looking back on them nowadays, with the 33rd MCU movie coming out this year, I really believe there's a lot to appreciate about what he brought to this franchise. And it is disappointing the franchise seems to be going in a much blander, sanitized route. But even as much as I disliked Rise of the Beasts, there is always fun to be had with seeing big robots fight each other on screen. You can do a lot better, but you could do a lot worse than that film. This franchise fully represents and encapsulates Hollywood in so many different ways. The soulless, artless, corporate attitudes on the surface, but if you dig deeper, you can find real art in these films. Real craft of the filmmaking, real heart and soul. Not in all of them, but it's there. There really isn't anything else like this series, and they make an interesting case study. From Hollywood studio politics, real-world American politics, the tarnished reputation they left a once kinda genius filmmaker in. There are a lot of different aspects to these films to talk about, which is why I was able to talk about them for so long. And that alone really makes this a one-of-a-kind franchise for all its problems and missteps. I think I can safely say that there is more to these movies than meets the eye. Thank you for watching.